Welcome to LFPL's At the Library series, an ongoing podcast featuring author talks, programs, and events at the Louisville Free Public Library. For more information about upcoming events, visit us online at www.lfpl.org/upcoming events.
It is my pleasure to introduce today's distinguished speaker, Dr. Charlton Chaz Yingling. Dr. Yingling is a renowned scholar whose research encompasses revolutions, race, religiosity, and interspecies history, including the roles animals have played in human societies. His research spans the 16th through the 20th century across Latin America, the Caribbean, and North America. Dr. Yingling has an impressive array of publications to his name. His insightful articles have appeared in prestigious journals, such as the History Workshop Journal, Past and Present, English Historical Review, Atlantic Studies, and the Early American Studies. He has featured on various media outlets like the BBC News and Vice News, as well as contributing to podcasts and other platforms. Dr. Yingling's acclaimed book, Siblings of Soil, Dominicans and Haitians in the Age of Revolutions, earned an honorable mention for the Duarte Prize from the Latin American Studies Association, Haiti and Dominican Republic section in 2023, a testament to his extensive research conducted in over 24 archives around the globe, from the Dominican Republic and Haiti to Spain and the Vatican. So in addition to his solo endeavors, I don't know how you have the time, but kudos. Dr. Yingling has collaborated on numerous projects, including significant research with Dr. Tyler D. Perry on the use of dogs as instruments of biopower in the Americas, and which was honored in the Oxford University Press Journals of the Best of History selection for 2020. So, without further ado, from one Charlton to another, please join me in welcoming Dr. Chaz Yingling.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for coming out. I know that there are many other claims to your time. I'm sure that there are other interesting things that you could be doing with your time than being here tonight, and so I really appreciate your curiosity and your interest in a topic that is very close to my heart. So I hope to speak from my head, from a few years of experience on this stuff. I also hope to speak from the depths of the human experience, or the depths of the soul, if you want to say it that way even, about a place that I care about a great deal, not only professionally, but definitely personally. And just out of curiosity, has anybody been to Haiti in here before? A few folks. So if you want to speak to your own experience at the end in the Q&A session, please feel free to do that. I will be happy to take questions. So if you have anything that comes to mind, please save them up and please ask at the end. I'd love for this to be conversational when we get the chance to get to that part. So, I want you to consider something here, just to start off the topic tonight. What do you think about when you hear Haiti? When you turn on the news in the morning, when you get in your car and NPR comes on or whatever it is you listen to, and that name comes up, what comes to mind? And there are many things that probably do come to mind immediately for all of you individually based on your own life experiences, okay? Is it because that Haiti is widely known as the lowest GDP country in the Western Hemisphere? That's true, that's factually true. There's so much more to it than that, and I hope you'll join me on that exploration, that ride here in just a minute. Do you think about things like Vodou, the widely known and often widely misunderstood religious expression that a percentage of the Haitian population performs? Do you think about things like civil strife, which of course has been on the news nonstop over the past, really 2 to 3 years since the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse, which we'll talk about? You think about things like natural disasters. Of course, it was only 14 years ago, January 2010, there was an earthquake that killed hundreds of thousands of Haitians, primarily in the capital city of Port-au-Prince. And on a regular basis, they experience things like torrential downpours, hurricanes, tropical storms, et cetera, that do cause extensive natural disasters and human suffering as well. My guess is these are the kinds of things that you do think about. But I'm here to convince you, hopefully today, that those are not the things that should come to your mind first and foremost. What should come to mind when you think about Haiti? And to answer the top question, hopefully we can work through some of these major themes today. And this is roughly how the talk is broken down. Is Haiti peripheral? Is Haiti at the edge or the fringe of the modern world, as it's often depicted? Or is Haiti, in some really extraordinarily important ways, front and center to the history of the Americas and to some of the most important constructs of citizenship, constitutional rule, the revolutionary expression against empires, for example, slavery and abolition? Is Haiti central to those stories in a way that's often ignored or not fully represented when you get a 90-second clip on the news about what new horror has unfolded for the very wonderful Haitian people who I have had the fortune of spending time with in my life? Now, we are going to, don't take notes on this stuff, okay? But these are all the things we're going to go through, okay? We're going to do, I think on the next slide it says this is a speed run of the greatest hits of the last 500 years, okay? And we'll culminate at and we'll spend more time kind of hovering over certain key moments of Haitian history and how it fits in the global scheme of the past, 500 years, like I said. And if questions like this, again, come up, please feel free to ask at the end. Of course, when you compress all of this grand sweep of history into a very short frame of time, you have to leave some things out. So if there are things that do come to mind, I'll be happy to spend more time on them when we get to the end. So my, invitation, or you could say even invocation to you today would be to really think about how to understand the turmoil that is very real, the suffering that is very real for the Haitian people today. You have to understand the much deeper context of the past 500 years, roughly, for the entire island, to really get a good sense of the richness, the complexity, the importance, the depth of the Haitian people, okay? So, starting off, empire, commodities, and economies, how these major themes that made the Western world, so to speak, the Americas, Haiti was front and center to these struggles. What is this Haiti thing anyway? Where does the term even come from? Well, again, to kind of run through the history of empires in the Americas, the home site of Spanish colonization in the Americas initially, before the French even arrived, okay, of course, Saint-Domingue which became Haiti, was a French colony. The Spanish claimed the entirety of the Americas except for a portion of what is now Brazil that the Portuguese had, right? And that's something we can't really get into a lot of detail about right now. Initially, after the Columbus first voyage, there was a colony established in the mid and late 1490s with limited success on the coast of what is now the Dominican Republic and Haiti. After the foundation of Santo Domingo, which is in the bottom, let's see here, right about there, which is now the capital city of the Dominican Republic. That is the longest standing, lasting European settlement in the Americas. The western portion of the island was somewhat forgotten, okay? This is an extraordinarily rich terrain. It is very mountainous. For those has anybody been to the Dominican Republic? A few folks have been, so a few of you have been there. It's extremely mountainous. It's extremely fertile soil across the entirety of the island. A lot of it was previously volcanic. And the western portion of the island was extremely difficult to govern. And so Spanish colonists who were in the west basically had the luxury of ignoring anything from the capital city, which was the first, Spanish colonial city in the Americas, which led to trading illicitly with smugglers, pirates. Some of the terms that you've probably heard for piracy or pirates, like buccaneer, actually comes from this time period and this particular location, from the term boucanier, which is reference to smoking of feral pigs and cows as meat that came out of these colonies and ran wild. So the Spanish solution to this whole problem of being able to govern the western, third to fourth of the island was to devastate the entire side of the colony, which was to force everybody to the east, burn their towns to the ground, which gave the perfect location for these pirates, these buccaneers from all different nations to actually settle. These beautiful port cities, they were suddenly, they were burned, but opportunities for them to land and to attempt new forms of agriculture, which included things like not only catching the feral livestock and using them, but planting other kinds of crops. Indigo, using salt, which is extremely important this time period. And that is the place in which eventually the French gain an upper hand from all their other rivals to carve out that portion of the west of Hispaniola in the Caribbean, upon which later became the nation of Haiti. Okay? Eventually, the transition with extensive capital investment and extensive enslavement of African captives brought to the Americas, that portion of the island became one of the most lucrative acre-for-acre pieces of real estate in the entire world for a period of time. And again, at the bottom, if you want to know dates, 1697 is when officially that became a French colony separated from Spanish. Of course, today it's the Dominican Republic and Haiti. The name Haiti is a very, very old name. There are several names that come from the Taino people. Okay, so this is the indigenous population that had kingdoms across the entire island of Hispaniola. The population estimates have ranged, and there's a really great article, if anybody's actually interested in this, by an Italian scholar named Massimo Livi-Bacci. It's about an 80-page demographic study of the indigenous population of Hispaniola before European arrivals. The numbers range anywhere from 400,000 all the way up to 1 million people on the island. But what happened after European settlement? The Spanish spread diseases rampantly. Probably 70 to 80% or even more of the fatalities that occurred were from pandemics or epidemics on the island. The others died from malnutrition, mistreatment, torture, execution. Those were absolutely common features of early Spanish colonization. And then after those people were cleared off the entirety of the island, basically, over about the next 100 years, the population went from at least 700,000 to as many as 5,000 indigenous people. And then, so it was a total population collapse. Genetically, that then lived on in the relationships between European men and indigenous women and their offspring. So genetically, they didn't disappear entirely, but certainly as a population group, they did decline rapidly. In that same physical space, the French, once having established the colony of Saint-Domingue, in the period of only about 100 years, to use ballpark figures, forcibly imported almost 1 million African captives into this space that's only about the size of Maryland, so not very big, or maybe a third or a quarter of Kentucky, okay, to put it in more local terms. Not a big space. By comparison, the entirety of North America, for about 350 years of the direct importation of African captives, only had about half that number. Okay, so at least 850,000 African captives in only a 100-year period of time into this very confined space. Because of that brutality, Saint-Domingue, which eventually became Haiti, was the most profitable colony in the Americas, like no question whatsoever. And you see the number, 500,000 enslaved out of 600,000 people. That is because the attrition rate of the population was so drastic from the mistreatment of the enslaved population, which I'll talk about more in just a second. And by comparison, if you look at the bottom, this was the largest population, if it were a U.S. state, it would be the largest population except Virginia. So in terms of other colonies at this time period, the new U.S. states only had one state that was larger in population than Saint-Domingue. It produced 40% of the sugar and probably at least 50%, if not 60% of all of Europe's coffee consumption in this tiny space, compared to all the other colonies that were there, right? It produced not only sugar, but tobacco, indigo, cotton, salt, etc. It generated unbelievable amounts of wealth for the French Empire. There have been estimates that something like 25% of capital circulation in the French Empire circulated through Saint-Domingue. Not that it produced that entire number, but what the point is, it was a massive windfall of profit from basically enslavement of these people. The Atlantic commodities that produce obviously are still in demand today. You probably consumed some of them this morning, coffee with sugar in it, for example. The brutality of the slave regime resulted in mass deforestation. So deforestation and soil erosion have been common problems in Haitian history that have only sort of snowballed into the present day. So one of these features, which was lush terrain, rivers, etc., has over time, because of the kind of monoculture of crops that the French imposed, primarily sugar, has then been inherited by the Haitian state, which they've not improved, to be quite frank. And now the population is closer to 11 million on this relatively small piece of land. And over a long period of time, that condition of soil erosion has not been mitigated, okay? On top of this kind of structure of the mass enslaved population, there were a small number of people who benefited extraordinarily. There were two groups of colonial white French populations. One were called the Grand Blanc, or the big white, and the second group was called the Petit Blanc, or the small white. And that was kind of actually a name given to them by the enslaved themselves to poke fun at the Petit Blanc, or the small whites, who did things like fought as soldiers, were like low-level managers, counted money, or whatever, okay? The Grand Blanc were more commonly the landowners themselves, who were extraordinarily wealthy. And there were only about 50,000 of these people from this, enormous population of mostly enslaved people. The second group, almost as large a number, arguably more important politically, because of their sort of intermediary status racially in the French structure of the French of race in the French Empire, were the gens de couleur, which translates to roughly free people of color. And these were people of typically French fathers and African mothers, okay? If you want to kind of distill it down to that. Oftentimes, they inherited estates from their fathers, whether the relationship with their parents was legal or not in the eyes of the Catholic Church. And so some of the richest people with few political rights, which was a major tension before the Haitian Revolution actually began, were between the gens de couleur and the French Empire. Particularly when, as you may already know if you're a student of history, the French Revolution began in France proper, okay, which gave a new language, a new set of demands for the gens de couleur population, many of whom had actually studied at universities in France to demand citizenship and equality in the eyes of the French Empire, which they were not afforded because of their racial status. And then you have the majority of the population. Okay, there was a very small portion of free black people, but the majority of the population, 500,000 roughly, were enslaved. And the reason that their lifespan was so short, the average man working on a plantation 7 years, is because their jobs were dawn to dusk, in mosquito-ridden, diseased, swampy fields, using machetes and shovels and pickaxes and so on, arm to arm, ankle to ankle, swinging back and forth, in which people got hit, stabbed all the time, with stinging insects, biting insects. If there was any kind of, not only, besides overwork, which could definitely kill them, malnutrition, which could also kill them, if there was any kind of resistance, that was met with exemplary punishment, oftentimes in which people were executed with their bodies displayed. And I will spare you the details, but it is horrific stuff. You can look at my own work or other folks' work for more examples of that. So, there was not an increase in the population. There was an attrition in the rate of the population because of how horrific the conditions were. Which brings us to the next part. What happened next? Does anybody know what happened next? Okay. So in these social divisions, commentators at the time, like for example, part of my expertise is on the Spanish side of the island, which was Santo Domingo, which is now the Dominican Republic. Commentators there looked across the mountains to the other side of the island, and they said in their letters, this is a volcano waiting to erupt. Okay, and there were other metaphors you could kind of splice in there. Any other kind of combustion metaphor pretty much would work. So on this, on top of this kind of like powder keg of social tensions, exploitation, horrific conditions, unbelievable wealth discrepancies, horrible mistreatment of the majority of the population, they then flicked the match of the Enlightenment, okay, which took decades to kind of percolate to the surface. But once it did, in the form of the French Revolution in 1789, it suddenly gave, particularly the educated gens de couleur population, the language to demand something better out of their lives, okay? So the fractures were already there, and then it took some kind of push to basically fragment or shatter this kind of very fragile social arrangement. I won't go through all this, but France had its own problems, right? It had enormous debt, partly incurred by supporting, the loss of the 7 Years' War, then by supporting the United States in its independence war against Britain. By the time the king called a national assembly to basically agree on new taxation, there was an educated portion of the population, some would call them the bourgeoisie, who had read Enlightenment texts and wanted something themselves out of life that was different than what the French king offered, all right, in the French body politic itself. Okay, which culminated in eventually the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And if you know anything about this document, it's one of the most revolutionary documents that existed at this time period. If you read this compared to the Declaration of Independence in the United States, it's far more extensive and aggressive, I would say, probably in delineating a more radical form of political economy. It also offered language for the United Nations to eventually adopt and modify in some of the human rights language that the United Nations eventually used. The monarchy in France began to crumble. Okay, this is, again, if you're a student of history, you may already know about this, and if you want to know about how this influenced Haiti in more detail, please ask, and I'll be happy to talk about this later. So as the social fabric in France began to unravel, those educated whites, educated free people of color in Haiti not only paid attention, they decided to participate in these same debates in Port-au-Prince and Cap-Haïtien, which was then Cap-Français in the north, in the major cities of what eventually became Haiti. One of the first iterations before the revolt by the enslaved actually began was by this guy on the bottom right, who was one of the richest people in the colony. He owned a lot of humans as enslaved people. So he was not like an egalitarian in a thoroughgoing way as we might recognize it today. His name was Vincent Auger. There was another figure by the name of Julien Raymond. There was another figure who cooperated with Vincent Auger named Chavannes, Jean-Baptiste Chavannes, who actually fought in Georgia with other people from Saint-Domingue during the American Revolution, believe it or not. And they demanded some of these political rights for themselves. However, their uprising failed in 1790. But that and other events, he was tortured. It was ugly, right, what happened to him in the end. But this, again, was one of these kind of like defining moments that led, it was kind of the beginning of the beginning, which then spiraled over the next series of months as these kind of ruling factions began to bicker and fight and execute each other, a circular firing squad of the elites. In August 1791, a group of enslaved people across plantations in Nord, which is like the northern province, right outside one of the major cities, Cap-Français, from basically some of the most profitable acreage in the world at this time period, sugar plantations, met in the woods at night. They did perform, as far as we know, right, which the records on this are not awesome, something like a voodoo ceremony in which they prophesied their own success against the French, and they planned at a later date to launch a full-scale social revolution to basically avenge their own condition and liberate themselves. The leader of this was Dati Boukman, and this is an image of Haitian art on the right that shows what was the ceremony that otherwise has now become known as Bois Caman, is the ceremony that kind of planned out and then eventually launched this revolution from below. This spread rapidly across plantations, okay? Eventually, the bottom point being extremely important, the enslaved people themselves did not even initially demand the end to slavery as a system. They had other lists of demands because it was almost incomprehensible for anybody at that time period, even the enslaved themselves, to think that this system would go away overnight. Okay, but what it eventually ended in, which is extremely important and puts Haiti at the top of the charts in terms of accomplishments in this entire revolutionary period, which of course occurred across the entirety of the Americas, basically, was that it pushed Enlightenment categories and ideals far beyond their intended application and who it was meant for, including people of non-European descent, people of African descent, and eventually even Haiti experimented with things like co-ed education, including girls in school, very early on in their national existence, which I'll get to. If you want me to talk about that, I'll be happy to. Once the enslaved launched this revolt, they were almost actually sold out. An enslaved person was caught and confessed because he forgot the day, and he revolted too early. He started stabbing people, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Yeah, we're going to all do this, and like now." And then they didn't believe him because it was incomprehensible to the French that the enslaved could actually plan something this vast and sophisticated. But it worked, and in the first few weeks, first few months, about 100,000 people at least were in arms across this extraordinarily profitable acreage that they then set on fire. And there are these really incredible stories, too, about the French vacating their properties, fleeing into the port city, sitting on vessels in the harbor waiting to leave Saint-Domingue, and reading letters at night lit by the fires, basically, that were miles into the interior because it put that much light into the night sky, okay? So this was one of the fastest spreads, literally like fire, of revolutionary sentiment that you can imagine. Typically, what they were armed with were farm tools. They didn't have a lot of guns to use, so they showed extraordinarily bravery and even desperation in the way that they fought against regular French soldiers who they began to defeat. And zooming out and making an overall point about what they were about to accomplish, and I'll tell you some more details about this in just a second. In very quick succession, the French, British, and Spanish all became involved. And these revolutionary groups, in the end, and that was much more complicated than what's on the screen, defeated the major empires in the world, the most sophisticated armies in the world, the best equipped, best funded, etc. Hundreds of thousands of people died, and this extraordinarily rich agricultural society was leveled to the ground, which is what the Haitian state inherited. They didn't inherit the profitability of the acreage that was there before. Of course, they didn't keep slavery, so sort of the underpinnings of that system disintegrated so that they could have liberty. If you've not learned about the Haitian Revolution, maybe you should think about why, because this is a pretty incredible event. This is a vast social revolution, very different in many of its fundamentals than what happened in North America at a similar time. It is silenced in Western history. It's something that's only really been revived in academic history over the past 20 or 30 years by the generation kind of that preceded me in academia. It was, at that time period, unspeakable power for people of African descent to destroy the French, the most profitable French colony, and then all these other competing empires. And so arguably, it was something like a modernity disavowed. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and skip that just for the sake of time. One of the most important figures of this entire time period, who you may have heard of, right, is this figure named Toussaint Louverture, who was born Toussaint Breda, the name of the enslaver. He did earn his freedom in the 1770s before the revolution began. He had a very, very difficult life. He was an extraordinarily intelligent person. He probably taught himself to read with some help from French priests. He may have actually read early abolitionist texts. That's an interesting conjecture. And during this time period, he rose to being one of the masterminds of the revolution. He was an unbelievably talented, self-taught general in terms of military strategy. He was one of the most gifted politicians you can imagine. He was, in many ways, probably more powerful at his peak, and in terms of performance, more impressive than other figures of this time period like George Washington or Simon Bolivar. He was born to a lesser noble family of African descent, and was enslaved. I said this up at the bottom. At the same time period that Toussaint was rising to power in France, things like the guillotine were being implemented, even against the king, okay? So this revolution that had begun, the point that I'm trying to show you here is, there was suddenly an opportunity in this other chaos happening in the rest of the French state for them to assert even greater autonomy and greater rights, which led to the French having to basically attempt to quell and integrate this upsurge in their own politics during the time period of the French Revolution, which led to, in 1793, the extension of universal emancipation in Saint-Domingue, which was the first in the history of the world. Now, eventually what came was far beyond that, which eventually led to the independence of Haiti entirely. Okay, I've already said all that stuff on the top of the screen. One of the reasons that Haiti eventually became independent and fought a war for independence beyond just the demands for abolition of slavery was because of Napoleon Bonaparte. Has anybody heard of Napoleon Bonaparte before? When he rose to power, he decided that one of his objectives would be to revive the profitability of the French Empire. And in his mind, he was definitely a racist person. He wanted to re-enslave the entirety of the population that had earned liberty from the French. So when this became known in Saint-Domingue, figures like Toussaint and his officers, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Henri Christophe, and others, basically realized that they were going to have to break with France and fight a war to the death, which is exactly what happened, which finally pitted the most powerful army in Europe. Napoleon actually sent his brother-in-law, Leclerc, as the general of the expedition to try to put down the rebellion. 60,000 French troops, maybe not quite that many, died, partly from yellow fever. So you may say it was because of disease, but the reason it was because of disease is because the Haitian soldiers and the generals themselves actually strategized, and it says it in their letters, to keep the French troops who had no immunity to these tropical diseases in the port cities long enough for the mosquitoes to hatch in the springtime so that they would be infected and die. And it worked. There's a really interesting book called Mosquito Empires by McNeil, if you're interested in that. So the French efforts to reinstall slavery totally failed. However, at the end of this conflict in the last few months, Toussaint was betrayed. He was imprisoned. The first time he ever stepped foot in France was as a prisoner. He died in the French Alps a mere weeks before he could see Haitian independence. The War for Independence finally concluded with the support of his closest officers, particularly Jean-Jacques Dessalines. They took literally the French flag, the red, white, and blue of the French flag, and cut out the white, quite symbolically. They turned it sideways, and they put a new emblem in the middle. And in his declarations of independence, Jean-Jacques Dessalines spoke about things like avenging the Americas. Of course, this colony had been called Saint-Domingue, right? He deliberately went out of his way to pick the name Haiti to revive the legacy of the Taino people who had been obliterated by the Spanish. So it was to basically avenge the history of the Americas of all this violence against the indigenous population and the African population that came after them. Okay, so that was a very symbolic thing. So when you hear the name Haiti, you should definitely think about this from now on, if you didn't know about this already, okay? And unlike the United States at this time period, which had a, constitutional republic, whatever, where there were still hundreds of thousands of people enslaved here, slavery was completely abolished in Haiti. Everybody had citizenship. It was absolutely a radical event, far more so than what happened in other parts of the Americas at this time period. But did the world take this well? What do you think? Probably not. So Haiti did transform the Americas in many ways. It also gave people like Thomas Jefferson nightmares, literally. He wrote about that extensively. So the way in which the rest of the world metabolized this event also set this tone for how histories of Haiti would be written. And most of those histories, as they were written early on in places like North America, were about the butchery of the enslaved people who, how dare they, killed all these French who were torturing them, etc. So the way those kinds of narratives, those kinds of tropes, were then kind of folded into these other narratives about Haiti and the Western Hemisphere in general, where you have this triumphalism about what happened in North America, and Haiti, even though it took some of these ideas and pushed them far beyond where the French or the United States wanted them to go, somehow is an aberration, right? It also influenced, I know it's probably hard to believe, the Louisiana Purchase, because Napoleon gave up on his idea of reviving the French Empire across the Americas. He could no longer control Haiti. He could not control the population. He could not revive the sugar economy. So he sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States for not much of anything. Okay, and that's a whole story that if you read up on history, you probably know. So I will not linger there very long. This sent shockwaves of popular unrest across the rest of the Americas. There were revolts influenced by the Haitian Revolution in South Carolina, in Louisiana, in Brazil, definitely in Cuba. And there weren't just one or two. There were multiple of these events that occurred. It was a massive inspiration to the black population that was oppressed across the entirety of the Americas. Haiti also offered free soil protection to anyone who was enslaved who could make it there. No questions asked. So you have these incredible stories about people even in like the Danish Caribbean. I know probably people don't even know this, but the Virgin Islands of the United States were actually Danish colonies at one point. People would fell trees, make canoes, paddle to Puerto Rico, run across Puerto Rico, and then somehow try to make it to what is now the Dominican Republic and run across the island to make it to Haiti so that they could be free citizens. Now, did a lot of people do that? No, that's pretty hard to do. But they tried. That's just an example of how influential the example of Haiti and free soil was. They also supported independence movements in the rest of the Americas, including Spanish, Latin American independence against Spain. They offered safe haven, they offered guns and weapons, etc., to people like Simón Bolívar. And then, long story short, when Simón Bolívar then tried to make a Pan-American confederation of nations, he didn't invite Haiti, who had actually supported him at his darkest point when he had basically been defeated by the Spanish and had no other place to go. So what did that say? That was, and part of the reason is, of course, it's this racist, exclusionary idea. Other setbacks, besides international entanglements, were internal in their making, okay? No questions about it. Dessalines, after independence, centralized power on himself, he eventually declared himself emperor, which didn't go well for people who were interested in having a republic, and he was assassinated. There was a division between the North and the South. There was a low-level civil war that happened between Henri Christophe in the North, Alexandre Pétion in the South. That was not great, okay? Eventually, Jean-Pierre Boyer unified Haiti, but after unifying Haiti back together, to have international recognition from their former enslaver, from the former colonial power that dominated Saint-Domingue and Haiti, he signed an unbelievably exploitative treaty with the French, which today would be the equivalent of having to pay for their own freedom, their own literal freedom from slavery and independence, of about $21 billion, okay? And as you can see, the Haitian GDP today is not even that much, okay? So this has been a long-running, that was basically to have diplomatic recognition and trade access, okay? Because they'd been locked out. They'd been a pariah. So these are the stretches to which they had to kind of go. And this is what happened. That's actually me from a long time ago. In the north, another thing that kind of looms over the entire landscape of Haiti are these forts that the Haitians themselves built in the aftermath of winning independence so that they could see on the horizon they could see it on the horizon. That's the ocean up there in the distance. Okay, that's the ocean. Any French sails that might be arriving. And then they could sound the alarm and live in some of these forts on the hills with cisterns and lock themselves in and fight and keep their independence and keep their liberty in case the French ever decided to return. And that's actually the tomb of Henri Christophe right there standing against on the top. However, this again gets to one of these major setbacks of Haitian politics. To build these kinds of forts, many of the leaders of the state turned against the peasants and basically forced them into these public works, okay? So again, there's a cycle that then emerges where state leaders who have this extraordinary promise, who try to make these social pacts and arrangements, sometimes they succumb to treating the general population who they make these promises to as something like second-class citizens, okay? And in this case, a lot of Haitians who had been previously enslaved were forced to build this fort, Cité de la Ferrière, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can go there. It's quite a hike. I hiked all the way up. I'll come back to this in a little bit. It also is a cycle that's occurred all the way through to the present day, where Haitian political leaders make promises and they use some sort of violence oftentimes that then leads to their own kind of unpopularity and downfall. Don't tell UNESCO that I climbed up on top of that wall, please. That was like 20 years ago, but I don't know if there's like a statute of limitations or anything. That's a joke, by the way. In 1844, things got worse on the international stage. There was a brief unification with the Dominican side of the island. They were thrown out. And I'm happy to speak about this too. This is actually more my area of expertise than anything, is Dominican-Haitian relations. This led to an extraordinarily tense period of time where there were long-standing kind of skirmishes on the border across the island. And Haitian politics resorted to other forms of authoritarianism at times, including the regime of Suluk, who was declared as emperor. So this authoritarian cycle is another thing that kind of happened on a regular basis. Now, you can justify that in certain ways about defending against external threats and so on. But it definitely had a stunting effect on the body politic itself in terms of actually realizing some of these revolutionary promises. Nevertheless, I'll just summarize what you see on the screen. Haiti continued to support regional neighbors when they were harassed and even reoccupied by European forces. For example, their arch rivals, the Dominican Republic. When Spain came back and briefly recolonized the Dominican Republic in the 1860s during the United States Civil War, Haiti supported them. Haiti supported running the Spanish off the island, okay, at their own expense, basically, okay? Eventually, now I'm skipping a big chunk of time here, in the late 19th century, this led to this kind of stagnating effect of authoritarianism, this enormous debt burden. This led to U.S. increasing interest in kind of dominating the hemisphere as a neocolonial power, the Monroe Doctrine, et cetera. I won't linger on those things since you probably know about them already. Haiti came into the crosshairs as being one of these places of instability that the United States was worried about, including the fact that some of the sovereign debt had been parceled out to German institutions. And so there were other competing interests that the United States had problems with on the global stage that suddenly were taking an interest in the Caribbean, and they saw Haiti as being kind of a weak chain, or a weak link in this chain of hemispheric interests. So in 1915, long story short, Wilson sent in Marines to occupy. They sent all the gold deposits in Haiti back to the United States for safekeeping, which did not go well with the Haitian population, and they didn't leave for almost 20 years. In this time period, the United States became identified as being a neocolonial power, okay, which in some ways they were. And there was a regular kind of churn of popular unrest to kind of restore Haitian rule in Haiti, including from people like Charlemagne Prérault at the bottom, who was executed by the Marines and his body was put on display. Other things that the United States tried to install were things like the corvée system, which is basically a forced labor system upon the peasants. They thought that that sounded a lot like slavery, so they weren't entirely cool with that either. During this time period, interestingly, other negative falsehoods about Haiti percolated into U.S. pop culture for all these other associations we've already covered. This was when Jim Crow era was happening in the United States. You had troops from across the country, but including the South, who were sent to Haiti. They never experienced that kind of direct interaction with the vast majority of the population being black. They didn't treat them particularly well, and they didn't at all understand what they were experiencing culturally, including things like voodoo. So some of these ideas about the zombie movies, like I think it was Bela Lugosi was one of the first white zombie movies from like the 1920s or 30s, that came out of literature and tropes during the U.S. occupation of Haiti. So that whole genre of zombie stuff comes out of the U.S. occupation of Haiti. I know it's hard to believe for anybody here who watches things like The Walking Dead. And it's basically a total misinterpretation of the way that Haitian voodoo celebrated or understood the precarity of passing over from life to death, the living dead, and these kinds of concepts. Okay, again, if you want to talk more about that later, I'd be happy to try to answer some questions. So what I'm saying is there were besides the immediate physical presence, the immediate political ramifications, there were other kind of long-lasting implications of the U.S. occupation. When the United States eventually did leave, Stéphane Vincent, who was the president of this time period, declared a second independence. Okay, and so there was suddenly this new kind of like second lease on democratic experimentation that the Haitian people were interested in trying to do. Okay, however, Vincent himself actually lost favor with the majority of the Haitian population when, in 1937, the dictator of the Dominican Republic, Rafael Trujillo, ordered the Dominican army to execute 20 to 30,000 ethnic Haitians, basically in cold blood. It was like an ethnic cleansing on the borderland. He accepted basically a peace agreement with Rafael Trujillo, who the Haitians hated, understandably. Rafael Trujillo's grandmother was actually Haitian, believe it or not. He actually wore white cosmetics to cover up his African heritage, which is also another fascinating aspect of this whole dynamic. But because Vincent played nice with Trujillo in making up, he lost favor with the Haitian people. So again, I won't cover this up on top, except to say, voodoo is unfortunately very maligned. I've met voodooisans. I've been past the Honfort, the voodoo temples. I've heard the drums. It's fascinating. And one of the friends that you see in some of these pictures, the Genelus family, some of that branch of the family, a different branch of the family, actually are pretty well-known voodoo practitioners in the north, on the northwest of the country, around Gonaïve. Yes. Promoted ingratiation with the Catholic Church and U.S. investors. So some of the suppression, the point is, the second sentence right here? Yeah. So there were multiple iterations of this across Haitian history, but the Haitian state, instead of celebrating and embracing the fact that, at least hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people in Haiti practiced some iteration of voodoo, they suppressed it because of all the negative associations with the revolution and with the U.S. occupation, et cetera, in the outside world, to have better relationship with the Catholic Church or to have better relationship with U.S. investors, et cetera. Okay, so it was basically denying part of their own kind of national culture and identity. Voodoo is, as in many religious forms, it does celebrate things like giving gifts to people who are in need, helping people who are in need. It's a community. And one of the most important facets of voodoo of all is that it was a salve spiritually, culturally, for building communities for these enslaved people who were in these horrible conditions, to celebrate the births and relationships and death, okay, which is a kind of a basic function of like the human experience, okay? So what formed as voodoo was extremely beneficial at many points of time to the people who practice it, like other people who have practiced other religions, okay? It's gotten a bad rap, to be quite blunt. for a lot of bad reasons. And if you want to talk about voodoo later, I'm happy to, but we can come back to this slide later. For the sake of time, I'll just go ahead. Part 4. So after this U.S. occupation stuff, after all these, to put it mildly, speed bumps, impediments in international relations, there was a dark time period in the mid-20th century in particular, where Haiti fell into a series of basically military dictatorships. Primarily, the most famous was the Duvalier family. Who's heard of Papa Doc Duvalier? A few folks. Now, before we get to talking about the Duvalier, I want to insert one of the most important ideas, hopefully, that I can introduce to you in the entire talk, which is by this gentleman on the right, who is an extraordinarily accomplished, brilliant, US-based intellectual named Misharov Tuyot. He worked at the University of Chicago for a long time, 30 years, something like that. I can't really remember. In my own book, I don't actually like to talk about other scholars in that much, unless you read the footnotes, it's all in there. But the only person who I mentioned by name, kind of name drop as a scholar in my entire first book, is him. He was absolutely a phenomenal thinker about Haiti, Haitian history, Haitian culture, and including relationships with the Dominican Republic, the rest of the Caribbean, etc. One of his books is called Haiti, State Against Nation. And it's this idea that the way that the Haitian state, particularly in the 20th century, but with roots dating back further than that, was that there was a tiny minority, oftentimes it had some French ancestry, the former Jean de Codo population, if you want to think of it that way, who had a few friends, a few influencers, and kind of a death grip on power. Both the actual physical land itself, the means of production, infrastructure, access to port cities, access to international relationships, credit, etc., who held the state not with the idea of using it to better the people, but basically using the state as a cudgel or a tool to whack the population on the head to get from the population what it wanted, which was financial benefit, if you want to put it that way. And there was this kind of rotation through the bureaucracy of holding the state as an implement for self-enrichment. So one of his theses was that the state of Haiti itself, as a government, became an antithesis or kind of like an antagonist to the majority of the population that it exploited. Interesting idea. Okay. And again, corruption, authoritarianism, these kinds of themes unfortunately played out extensively throughout the 20th century of Haiti and all the way to the present day. Why did the Duvaliers come to power? Again, I'm skipping over some period of time here in the 40s, like the Magloire era, to get to these two figures. Papa Doc and Baby Doc Duvalier. Baby Doc is definitely kind of a pejorative way that some people kind of teased and made fun of him because he was not actually a physician. His father was actually a physician, which is a fascinating thing because he had a reputation initially in his life as being a caregiver of like the poor. He helped solve some really nasty skin conditions. He became the Minister of Health. He had this very kind of like glowing reputation among the poor themselves. Okay, we'll get to that. But the reason, and this fits into another theme internationally, the reason that they were so useful at this time period to the United States is because they were anti-communist. So despite the rampant violence and horrible stuff that his supporters did, like the Tonton Macoute, he did get checks cut to him from Washington, D.C., because he was anti-communist. This is a time period when Castro was rising in Cuba, etc. He was extremely anti-democratic eventually and extremely violent to his political opponents. Again, I don't want to give you nightmares, but if you want details, I guess I could give you details. Papa Doc François Duvalier was president from 1957 to 1971. He gained a reputation. He was a university-trained physician. He actually did a public health residency at the University of Michigan. He went back to Haiti. He fought against a very nasty disease called yaws. I don't know if you know about this, but it's a tropical disease that basically causes these horribly painful ulcers on the surface of the skin that then erupt, and it's like terrible, terribly painful, nasty thing. He helped fight that in the countryside. And during this time period when he was doing this, he started not only building this enormous network who really appreciated him, he was like this shy, kind of like bookish physician doing like really important work. And people liked that. He also became ingratiated with a group of intellectuals that sometimes have been called noiristes, but it's basically like a renaissance of pro-Black Haitian literature and culture, including, to some degree, the affinity for or affiliation with Vodou. Okay, so this is like in his early life before he rose to power. One of the reasons that he came to power is after the fall of the Magua presidency, there was a series of candidates that ran. The reason that he was kind of selected with a wink and a nod by the military and by some of the really wealthy elite of the formerly Jean de Coulomb mulatto population in Port-au-Prince, it's because they thought they could manipulate him. They thought he was just kind of like this like dorky guy. He was like not particularly physically imposing. He was very kind of subtle and like, oh, people like him. Just run this guy, and we can just pull him like a puppet, basically. However, when he actually was elected, again, I'll put that in air quotes because it's not entirely clear that there wasn't rampant fraud in that election, he then, when he had any kind of opposition, he used his extensive network across the country to crush ruthlessly any opposition to his rule. One of the interesting things about Duvalier is not that long after this 59 is an important year, right? That's when the Cuban Revolution really kind of succeeded next door, literally next door. You can see Cuba from Haiti and vice versa on clear days when you're in the extreme northwest of Haiti, okay? That's how close they are. He had a major heart attack. The United States flew in physicians from Guantanamo Bay and nursed him back to health, during which time he was in a coma for a long period of time. When he came back, there's been speculation from biographers and so on, so I'm not trying to like weigh in on this as this is definitive. People said that his personality changed, and that he went from being this kind of like shy, sheepish, whatever public figure to being much more vicious, okay? So that's like one of these questions of I can't answer for you, but people definitely at the time period thought that was a contributing factor. In this time period, after 1950s, in the 1960s, he began to publicly adopt some of these kind of character points of figures from Vaudou. Particularly the figure Baron Samedi was the figure that he kind of impersonated, his group of armed, you could say gangs. They were kind of like a paramilitary group, militia. Tonton Makou, they were formed after another kind of affinity in Vaudou for death, like symbols of death or figures associated with the passing into the afterlife. They killed thousands of people with impunity. They suppressed unions. They suppressed women's movements. They suppressed even the clergy. They killed a lot of Catholic priests. Eventually, he made nice with the Catholic Church. But he would also practice Vaudou, at least symbolically, on the side. Okay, so he was a very interesting figure in that regard. However, his health was never very good. He died in 1971 after another massive heart attack, at which time his son, baby doc Jean-Claude Duvalier, took power. And he was not the same kind of figure as his father. He was definitely not as like strategically adept. Other factors in the 1980s that damaged Haiti after he'd been in power for a while. He eventually left power. He was kicked out in the mid-1980s. Haiti was falsely blamed when AIDS first came on the scene globally for being one of these places in which AIDS supposedly may have incubated and then passed on to other parts of the world. Eventually that was proven to be false, but they were kind of suspected of that for a while. Eventually also they were suspected of being a vector for the circulation of swine flu and other agricultural diseases, which may have been partly true, but they took a lot of unnecessary blame for that, which led to the execution of livestock, which decimated the kind of self-sustainability of the peasant population in the interior. And these factors combined, the destruction of tourism because of the whole AIDS crisis thing, which was not from Haiti, and the decimation of the kind of part of the agricultural base, led to a boom in the population of Port-au-Prince. This is another kind of like rabbit trail, so I won't go on this too far, but at different time periods, there were other cities in Haiti that had similar power. Cap-Haïtien in the north, which is now the second largest city, at times was actually more important culturally, you could say, than Port-au-Prince. By the mid-20th century, definitely with the Duvaliers, Port-au-Prince had become kind of the epicenter for Haitian politics, as it is today. And it's definitely the major center of politics, economic activity, education, and population. Okay, so today it's probably closer to 3 million, not considering the recent refugee crisis because of all the civil conflicts going on. In the 80s, after Jean-Claude Duvalier was kicked out of office, there was again, okay, this is now the time period where all of you may have living memories of this stuff. There was a figure who rose up out of some of the poorest areas of He was actually originally from the south of the country, but he made his reputation as a priest with a PhD. He briefly lived, I think it was in Canada, as part of his PhD studies, but he speaks very fluent, good English. He's an extremely bright guy. Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who has been in and out of power over the past 20 years. Not so much recently. He left power the last time in 2004. In the late 80s, he made a reputation for basically preaching liberation theology, which was a kind of liberatory Marxist-influenced form of Catholicism in some of the poorest neighborhoods of Port-au-Prince. He was a fantastic speaker. If you speak French or Creole, and even in English, his interviews in English are really compelling. He's a very compelling person to listen to. Very sharp, very well-versed in Haitian history, very well-versed in international affairs, how Haiti's been wronged. He was very early on talking about forcing the French through the United Nations to pay back the indemnity that Boyer had agreed to in the 1800s. Okay, so this guy he was very adept. He built this base of power.
Excuse me, he's back in Haiti now, isn't
he? He's living there, yeah. He's probably about 70, 71, so he's not really involved in politics anymore, but he was in, after he was kicked out in 2004, he lived in Central African Republic and then South Africa. He lived in South Africa for probably 6 or 7 years or more, and then he went back to Haiti. So he's there now, but he's not involved in national politics. Yeah. He was thrown out in a coup after his election. What's interesting is, in this case, the United States actually intervened on the side of constitutional rule, sent in troops under the Clinton administration, and reinstalled this kind of radical figure back into the presidency in 1994. So interestingly enough, despite all other things that happened between the United States and Haiti, on this occasion at least, this is not remembered poorly. Okay. He was reelected in 2001 as president of Haiti. Again, after not a very long period of time of being in office, he was accused of corruption. He was also accused, as the Duvaliers, as Soulouk, as Dessalines, as all these many other historical figures, of basically manipulating the public through forceful tactics, okay? So if you think about the stuff today, which we're going to get to in just a minute about the gangs and the crisis today, this is definitely something that Aristide is also accused of having done, okay? So he was then forced out of power on a U.S. plane. He actually said that he had been kidnapped by the CIA. That's been up for debate, and flown to Africa in 2004, which led to another period of extensive instability in Haiti. The guy, his name's Guy Philippe, but he is now back in the spotlight, which we'll get to eventually. He was very young when this happened in 2004. I want to say he was in his late 20s, maybe his very early 30s. But he led the armed coup launched out of the Dominican Republic that toppled the Aristide presidency, okay, and led to this period of time where there was kind of military rule, provisional council, eventually there were new elections, et cetera. That's happened multiple times in the past,
The uproar about a month and a half ago in Haiti.
Yeah.
In Haiti about a month and a half ago.
Uh-huh. He came, are you talking about Guy Philippe? Yeah, he's back he's back here now. I'll get to that in just a second. So he's actually not from the capital city. He's from Gonaïves. Gonaïves is the third largest city. It's an extremely important political city north of Port-au-Prince, between Port-au-Prince and Cap-Haïtien. I was actually there a few years ago when he was running for Senate. And the friend I was with was actually from the area of Gonaïves. And I remember walking through the city very vividly. And he pointed out a series of streets. He was like, that's Guy Philippe's area. And I was like, let's go look. He was like, no, you don't understand. Like, there are like checkpoint, like there are people in all these buildings. They would see you coming, like you probably don't want to get on there. And we didn't. I was always trying to do stuff that was like pushing the boundary probably too far. And I definitely had a good friend who was helping me not get myself into too much trouble. But after he's another figure who's very interesting, very well-educated guy. He also speaks English very well. He has friends in Washington, D.C. However, after he tried to run for Senate, I think this was in 2016, he was extradited to the United States and served a prison sentence for drug-related charges. I think it was actually money laundering that they got him for, but he was in a federal prison in Atlanta.
Sir, excuse me.
Yes?
Is in the United States, the Biden administration sent him $100 million about a month and a half ago?
Guy Philippe, $100 million? I don't know about that one.
And they came back and gave another $30 million?
To Guy Philippe directly? I don't know about that one. Yeah. Guy Philippe has no official position, but he is someone who's lurking in the shadows right now as a major figure who could have, and that's the reason I'm kind of like, foregrounding this guy, because he might actually come back to being a very important figure now. After all this turmoil in the 2000s, of course, I think we've already talked about this a little bit. In 2010, there was this massive earthquake in which perhaps 200,000, perhaps even 300,000, Haitian estimates are actually higher than the UN, were killed. So for those of you who've been to Haiti, have you been to Port-au-Prince? Yeah. So it's from the colonial era. It's a very low-lying, it was a French city, right? It was a very low-lying port town built on kind of marshy land that then extended up the hills to places like Pétionville, which is one of the nicer suburbs that's very integrated in the capital city, into Croix de Bouquet, which is like an interior, like a cul-de-sac region. It's all like, the country itself is very mountainous, but this particular region is very low-lying, very flat, very marshy, swampy, and it's mostly concrete and rebar, which is when you then shake that kind of ground with a massive earthquake, it's like jello. Okay, so the topography itself, the geology itself, does not support those kinds of buildings when there's that much seismic activity. So the city basically just collapsed on itself. Some of the people who were killed, it's just horribly tragic in general, but whole classes, like whole graduating classes of like nurses were just crushed. Okay, it was truly, truly horrific. And on top of that, in this rebuilding effort, the international community actually was extremely generous to Haiti and sent in a lot of money. In the years that then followed, it then came to light that a lot of that money, hundreds of millions of dollars, were probably siphoned away into personal enrichment schemes. And that some of the actual food aid that was sent in never made it off of the docks, okay? Which is extremely depressing. And I was there in 2015. Is that right? Yeah, I think it's right, 2015. And they were still rebuilding from the earthquake 5 years after. That was the National Palace, okay? You can see just from these images the kind of devastation. That's one of the national cathedrals. I walked by that building 5 years after, and that's actually really close to some of the archives that I worked at in Port-au-Prince, like the National Archive and the one of the Catholic archives there. And that building was still undergoing construction. It basically been mostly abandoned. This led to, on top of just the devastation to the economy, the people, the loss of lives, a permanent displacement of a significant portion of the population into tent cities outside. And so another thing that I did during my research, I would do research during the day in the National Archives, and then I had a really good friend, and we would just jump on motorcycles and drive out to the tent cities and just hang out. He had friends out there, so we'd go and just have these fascinating conversations with people. Like one of his brothers taught for a Korean charity in one of these tent cities called Kanan, which I believe was north of Port-au-Prince. So even now, with the turmoil that's happened in the past 2-3 years, this situation was never even resolved before these situations in the past few years have emerged. On top of which, and some of you may know about this as well, the United Nations sent in support troops, okay? And it seems that the Nepalese troops, based on the strain of cholera that emerged, the UN peacekeeping mission may have actually introduced cholera to Haiti. Haiti does not have an awesome water purification and sewage system. So that, on top of the earthquake rebuilding efforts, spread a massive disease across the population that they're still dealing with today, okay? So if that wasn't all enough, the rebuilding effort never really took off. So you have this enormous population of people in the city, young, who are underemployed, underfed, unheard politically, and this whole trope of kind of like popular militias and armed groups and so on, these political factions have emerged yet again, right, in recent history. Out of desperation. So when I was there too, doing research for my dissertation and book, it was a regular occurrence that people would be kidnapped for ransom, okay? Like really like middle-class Haitian people. And they demand enormous amounts of money that people oftentimes couldn't afford. And then oftentimes the people would be killed. That has just skyrocketed the past few years. It was bad then. I can't even imagine what people are suffering from. The majority of the population today. And again, at the bottom, just to point this out, Haiti is an extremely beautiful, rich place that you could have an agricultural system. However, the infrastructure is really lacking. It's never really been fully rebuilt. Soil erosion is still a problem, and so on. So there is a silver lining in the sense that that could turn around, but as of yet, it has not on that front. Further, when I was there doing, again, dissertation and book research several years ago, the Dominican Republic, one of the rival country next door, they basically had a constitutional reinterpretation. They stripped citizenship from ethnic Haitians who were born in the Dominican Republic. Okay? And people who had never been to Haiti before, they had a Haitian last name and so on. Sometimes they would round it up by armed groups, not necessarily officially from the Dominican state, and sent back to Haiti. So when I was going back and forth from different sides of the island, from one side to the other, the borders were literally like this, okay, like every day. People thought they'd be arrested, weren't sure, they were being sent back forcibly. It was a total chaotic scene on top of the whole earthquake rebuilding effort, okay? And then one of the reasons I put these pictures in, this is my really good friend, Jenelou Sojalab, who I call Ulisse, who actually, unfortunately, a lot of really great, smart, ethical people like him who are just really great people have left because of how rough it is to survive there. And he's in Brazil with all of his cousins. So I feel personally and professionally indebted to the Jenelous and Pierre families, all of his cousins and mom and stuff who I knew. A lot of them are gone. And these are the kind of people who you would want on the ground, like doing good things. Like he really wanted to teach kids. Like his brother-in-law had a school in the middle of nowhere where it was like an orphanage. They taught kids. They're really good people. And a lot of them have just left because they can't make it. And that's Port-au-Prince in the background. So this is actually Fort Jacques. This is one of these forts that rings the city, the mountains. That's one of the motorcycles we rode around that day. That was the guy who gave us the guided tour. And that's the city in the background, which today is suffering immensely. 80% of the city is now under control of non-state, non-governmental armed militias, groups, otherwise known as gangs, if you listen to American TV. We'll get into that more in just a few minutes. So how did this come about? What's this whole recent turmoil thing about? Around the time that I was there last, Sweet Mickey, does anybody know Sweet Mickey? Michel Martelly is a singer. He was really popular in the 80s in Haitian music. If you actually go on YouTube and you type in his name, Michel Martelly right there, or Sweet Mickey, you can listen to his stuff. I'm not sure anybody of you would like it, but if you want to play that on the way home, you can. I think he's on Spotify and those too. Okay. He handpicked his successor, Jovenel Moïse, who was into banana exporting. He worked for Culligan Water, which is an American water company that has offices there. I've had Culligan Water in Haiti. There was a lot of allegations of fraud, that Jovenel Moïse was not particularly popular. It was a contested election, as several elections there have been. It's not like that's a new thing. In that time period, fuel costs, gasoline, and so on, food costs just exploded. The quality of life deteriorated. It had never really improved from the earthquake, to be honest. And the state was just seen as being out of touch, unresponsive, and increasingly repressive against popular demands, okay, for like supporting food costs and so on. In July 2021, most of you probably do remember this. This was not that long ago, not quite 3 years, right? Jovenel Moïse was assassinated in his home by what eventually became to be identified as a group of mostly ex-special ops Colombians who were mercenaries, so that's from the country of Colombia, who had been hired by somebody with ties possibly through Miami, and again, possibly with the cooperation of Ariel Henry, who was the prime minister. That has never been resolved either. So it's a very murky situation as to who exactly ordered him to be killed and why and so on. I'm not going to even try to wade into that because it's never, I would say let's wait for judicial process to play out, but I'm not even optimistic that that'll really happen given everything that's going on right now. So for 3 years, Ariel Henry was basically the leader of Haiti. There was no president. There's not a president today, by the way. There's not been a president since Jovenel Moïse was killed. There's not been an election. He promised to step down. He promised to have an election. That didn't really happen. So allegations of corruption and allegations of incompetence by the people called the gangs today is not without some amount of credibility, okay? This is a really difficult, complex, intractable situation in which the state itself has abdicated a lot of its legitimacy and authority because of the way, over a long period of time, that the state has behaved toward the general population. A lot of unrealized promises, okay? He resigned, not that long ago, I think it was maybe February or March. It's been like 3 months. It has not been very long. There is a transitional council, but this transitional council has, questionable amount of control of the situation. In March, 4,000 to 5,000 now heavily armed felons were released from Haitian prison. And as they affiliated and infiltrated the ranks of some of these militia groups, some of these gangs, they almost took the international airport that I've flown through a few times, Toussaint Louverture International Airport, named for Toussaint Louverture, the revolutionary leader, general. 80%, like I said, 78% of the capital city of 3 million people is under control of these groups. And they don't all get along, and they don't even have the same objectives. Some of them don't even have political objectives. Some of them really are involved in trafficking people, drugs, some of them do have egalitarian aims. Some of them do have political aims. It's an extremely complicated situation. And it's very, very difficult to get accurate reporting because it's very difficult to get in there. And if anybody's curious, France 24, which is the English language French TV station, has actually sent people in on a regular basis. The BBC has done some of that. So there are people who have tried. It's just very, very difficult to do that. And I highly suggest you go and look at some of those reports recently. But at least 300,000 people have fled from Port-au-Prince to other parts of the country. But the point that I would make is this whole thing about armed militias, gangs, these kind of non-state actors being heavily involved in politics, that is not new, okay? This is the newest form. It's not something that happens in the United States, so people here don't really understand what this is. But a lot of people in these gangs they used to work for the national police. Okay, so Jimmy Cherizier, who I'll talk about here in a second, is one of these figures who was an officer in the National Police Force just a few years ago. And he was fired because he was accused of perpetrating a massacre and other corruption and things like that, okay? So now, these situations are not necessarily new in Haitian history, unfortunately. What is new, and I think this is really true, is I don't know if things have ever been this desperate for the general population. And I'll go through some of the details as to why, including things like the possibility of a famine. All right, there are probably about 4 million people who are in food precarity right now. Okay, only 2-hour flight from Florida. So in this situation, I've seen stats that 10 to 20 people die a day from armed conflict in the streets of the capital city. Again, how do you know? I don't know, to be quite honest. Tens of thousands have fled. I've heard numbers as high as 300,000. I believe that. I heard some of the reports early on that there were some neighborhoods in the center of the city, like Delma. Delma 6 is one of these. To me, it was like a normal middle-class neighborhood. I remember walking around the streets there. When I heard that those parts of the city were just fleeing, that's pretty extreme. So there are a lot of parts of the city that have basically become impassable because they're held by these armed groups, and the people have basically fled to other parts, which means they've left their occupations, they've left their wealth, they've left whatever. Okay, it's a ton of social disjointment all at once. Okay, and like I was saying before, there's a lot of quote brain drain. People have degrees, people have opportunities elsewhere. A lot of them, I know them personally, I know their hearts, or I know them through other people. They don't want to leave. They want to be in Haiti. They love Haiti. They love Haitian people. They want to help Haitian people. They want to be part of the solution, but they feel like they can't even be there in a safe way. So they have gone to Brazil, like my friend. They've gone to Philadelphia and Boston and New York and Montreal and Paris. Okay, so this is another compounding tragedy, this whole thing, right? They're not going to be contributing to American society, Canadian, French, whatever, not their own country, where they want to be. So who holds power? Well, nobody, really, to be frank. You could say it's kind of a collage of different people. One, who I'm sure you've probably seen on the news, is Jimmy Cherizier, who was known as Barbecue. The reason he's known as Barbecue is because apparently he was accused of tying up opponents and burning them, which he denies. Okay, so he does say that. France 24 and Sky News actually got in to interview him recently. So if you want to see him live on camera, you can. He was a national police officer He then left. He held a major port hostage, took ransom deal for that, etc. He's unified a collective of gangs that used to be rivals, in part with the express purpose of overthrowing Ariel Henry and having elections. So in the places where he holds, there's actually not food scarcity. Okay? So the neighborhoods that he's in power of, some people actually do see him as a Robin Hood figure. He uses a lot of revolutionary language. Now, is he sincere about that, or is he just playing a game because he wants some kind of personal enrichment? I couldn't tell you, to be quite honest. But he's someone you definitely have to pay attention to. He has said that he would lay down arms if he's included in peace talks, which he has not been. Okay, so that's another thing. And I don't know what's happened the past few days, to be frank, either. But that's another kind of watch this space kind of thing. Another person who's come back after spending 6 years in prison in the United States and Georgia is Guy Philippe. He's come back, and he's also, if you want to listen to interviews with him, go on YouTube. He is another person who's kind of jockeying for one of these national roles. And he could, who knows? He could emerge as being one of these national kind of figures to broker some kind of a deal, right? The state itself, again, going back to this whole idea of people like Michel Rolfe-Touillot or these other themes that we've talked about in Haitian politics, the state itself is in shambles. People are not showing up in terms of to their jobs. The police, the military are hit or miss as to whether they really are there or exist. There's going to be a force of 1,000 Kenyan police officers who are going to come in. They were supposed to have come in, I think, in January, and then that got delayed, and the situation's only gotten worse. Now, it's interesting because the Kenyans want to go in. One of the ideas is that the Kenyan police would be also of African descent, so maybe they'd be less likely to pull triggers. Nobody knows, but you know what? Kenyans don't speak French, or they don't speak Creole, right? And they don't know anything about Haitian culture, so who knows how that will actually play out. They will arrive at some point, probably in the next bit. The United States and Canada, who have extreme influence in Haiti, have been really hands-off. And partly it's for good reason. They've been overbearing in the past. Now I think they want to say, well, Haitians need to find their own solution. Will that happen? Who knows? I can't imagine at this point that they won't become more involved. I think that they probably will. The question is to how, right? And when will national elections occur? There's been this whole promise that it'll be in 2 years. Who knows, right? And in the meantime, it's like all these other major powers, right, have other things on the agenda. And you could put Israel-Palestine into that too, right? So it's Ukraine, China, all these other things happening, and Haiti's somehow been largely forgotten and definitely not had resources poured in upon it as other conflicts have, right? And one of the other trigger factors that may get the United States more involved is the refugee crisis. I think this is an image from the Florida Keys not that long ago, a few weeks ago. Haitian immigrants, Haitian migrants, refugees are now flowing into or trying to reach places like Florida. So oftentimes, the United States has been pushed to a reactionary position because of these kinds of events. We'll see how that plays out, right? What's going to happen in the meantime? Well, these are just like normal people. 95% of the population are normal, nice people who have no involvement whatsoever in these national political struggles and calamities and the warfare. They're just suffering, basically, because of all this disjointment in supply. Basically, supply chains are completely out of whack. There's the possibility of mass hunger. I mean, mass hunger already exists. There's a possibility of famine and death from starvation, okay? A few hundred miles off the shore of the United States. There are things like sex assault. It's terrible. You could say that this is some kind of a low-level civil war. It could get worse in that regard, to be quite honest. I think that remains to be seen. And health outbreak, on top of which, again, they're still dealing with things like cholera. All right, so what can I leave you with, okay? Aside from a lot of questions that you may have yourself, which I hope you do, right? This is not concluding as in, and here's a bow I'm just going to tie up and put on this, and ta-da, here we go. Here's the end of the story. There's no end of the story. How do we write this? How do we write the end of the story together? I don't know. What part do we play in this? We have to play some part. We're voting members of this country, for whatever that's worth. It means something to call representatives to say something about this. If you feel motivated to do that. These are the things we've covered. It's a lot. If you want to talk about one particular thing in that list of stuff and other stuff, feel free to ask. But what next? Okay, so thinking back to this part of the talk, how should Haiti be treated or valued? Should Haiti be remembered as like the most incredible story of the age of revolutions, where like one of the worst treated populations in the world of enslaved people defeated the three most powerful armies in the world and declared a constitutional republic in which everybody was legally free before any other country in the Western Hemisphere did that, and basically put all the pretenses of the United States as being this liberal democracy, whatever, to shame. Then they were punished for it. Should that be part of the story of like the Americas? And what place should that be, right? In our own story as being in this hemisphere, right? And all these other things we talk about. Where does Haiti fit in these narratives, and how should Haiti be remembered, right? So this is all like, in terms of the value that people put on Haitian society and culture, there's also a lot of really like deliberate, and sometimes maybe just, misunderstanding, right? But there's a lot of deliberate misinformation too about Haiti, Haitian culture, Haitian history, Haitian people, who I've spent time with them, and they are the most resilient people I've ever been around with in my life. And I feel deeply indebted, really, for the time that I've spent there with them. So what do we do? I don't know. But, I'm happy to answer questions if you have any. If I don't have answers, I will tell you I don't. Because for a lot of these, what is the answer? We're watching this play out in real time, And I'll be happy to refer you to other authors and scholars if it's not something that I've covered in my own work. So, again, thank you so much for your attention. I'm really delighted to be here. I wish there was some better note to leave it on, but this is like a really catastrophic situation that's developing. So, yeah. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, can people get away from Port-au-Prince and go into the rural communities? Is that one place where some people escape to?
Yes, some people have tried to go to the Dominican Republic. You have to have some either sneak in, which is possible, or you have to have a skill set that they need, like physicians or some kind of translating. There are ways that Haitians can get into the Dominican Republic legally.
And DR really wants to keep them.
They don't really want them there. Right, and that I can just see. I mean, because it's happening. Like, I'm not going to prophesy. Like, here we go. Here's what's going to happen. I don't know, right? But based on the past, there will be an inflow of Haitians into the Dominican Republic. There'll be some triggering event. Dominicans will react in a certain way, and there'll be a backlash in which the crisis of international relations between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, which is always in this, churn, will flare up again. Yeah. Did you have a follow-up?
Let me just have
Sure.
another part of this. And then in Miami, I know for a lot of years there's been a lot of dislike and discrimination of Haitians. So now, is that even worse?
I don't know if it's worse, to be honest. I don't really know. But yes, I mean, Haitians then, if they come to the United States, they deal with our own internal dynamic of not awesome race relations. So, yeah, that's definitely been true in Miami and elsewhere. There are a lot of Haitian population in Boston and New York. So, somebody else had a question? Yeah.
It's not a question, it's not a proper comment I would like to make in your presentation. And congratulate you first for what you tried to do in short video.
Yeah.
With the Haitian history. Let me say, my name is Jerry Delat. I'm a born Haitian. Whoa, look at my color. Yes, that's the mulatto of Haiti.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're a Haitian, because I wasn't Haitian. Okay. I want to say at the beginning in the revolution, when you're talking about arms for the revolution, I think you left out a good point. And myself, my mother, they fought for women rights in Haiti.
That's great.
And I'm still fighting for women's rights wherever I'm at. In the revolution in Haiti, the women played a big role.
Absolutely.
Especially stealing weapons from the French, from the one who had weapons, and bring them to the guy who wanted the revolution. I want to make that a point. The other part is when you talk about the aid in Haiti. Let me tell you a little story about Haiti and Haiti. Aid was brought up to Haiti. I'm not saying by the United States whatever. I'm sorry if I'm touching anything. But by people who had hate here because of their sexual orientation, and in Haiti, the organization is going to be used for it. There was a bordello for men in Haiti created by one of those people in Haiti. and they used to go and practice their whatever, and bring aid and exchange aid and give aid to Haiti. Put that as a note. When you come into the Duvalier regime, I was there.
Mm.
I know Jean-Claude Duvalier.
Mm-hmm.
Jean-Claude Duvalier, Papa Doc had time to give power to Jean-Claude, the son. But let me say something about that. That was a dictator, a cruel dictator, supported by the United States because of Cuba. Because they didn't want to have another Cuba and Haiti. So we have to make sure that we suffer the Duvalier regime with the support of the United States.
I'm going back to a picture because there's actually an interesting point about Baby Doc.
Baby Doc thought different about it than his father. And right there, I like that. Can you go back, please?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was going to go to a picture of La Cité de la Ferrière.
The Vaudou part.
Sure. There you
I
go.
want to say that about Vaudou for you. A lot of Vaudou figures come from the Catholic religion.
Yep.
Like Mother Mary, God, and all that. I'm not going to go into more detail into it, but you have to understand that the Vaudou is not as bad as people think.
Absolutely. Yep.
And we have to look at Vaudou for the Haitian as a religion. Not everybody who practice Voodoo are bad.
Most are great people.
I never practiced
Yeah.
it, but I know about it.
Yeah.
Okay? So, yes, you wanted to show something with Jean-Claude.
Well, it's not just him, but actually I was going to go back to the picture of La Cité de la Ferrière in the north. So to even get there, this is another kind of like these twists of irony of Haitian history, right? To get people up to this, you go from basically sea level to like 5,000 feet up. And I walked this in July, uphill. I walked it. You could take jeeps and stuff. So like UN trucks were there. They're like some Canadian soldiers, and they were just like, but it took like 3 hours to walk up there. It was really hot. Okay, but the road to get up there was built, I think, in part by the Duvaliers. I think it was Jean-Claude Bébédoc Duvalier forced Haitians to build the road to this symbol of liberty, okay, which was supposed to be, like to increase tourism or something. So it's another one of these like ironies, right? The symbol of liberty that was built by Henri Christophe to defend against the French basically was on the backs of people who had previously been enslaved. And a lot of people suffered for that too. And then to get people there to celebrate this and see it in person, Jean-Claude Duvalier, the dictator, forced people to build the road to get up there. It's another one of these twists and turns, yeah. What's up?
Forced to build, that's why when the citadel was built.
Yeah.
And the citadel is an eighth wonder of the world if people don't know about that.
It's incredible. Everybody should go. It's hard to get to, but yeah, you should.
It's not just road, that's the revolution.
No, I'm saying the road to get to it that's paved, that was built in the 80s. Yeah.
That's part of it. But to go back, and I want to make a correction also for the president now. Barbecue, his name didn't come up because he's burning people and eat them or anything like that. His mother used to cook barbecue in the side of the street and sell barbecue when he was coming up. So they give him the name because of the experience of his past life of his mother. Not because, I'm not saying he's not practicing that, but that's not where the name comes from.
But his rivals have used that to say that's why he's called that. Yeah, and he's denied it. I did say that. He denied it. All right.
Okay?
Yes.
So, please. Other part is, you did not cover deep enough the role of the United States of Haiti right now. Because why? Let me say that to you about Haiti, been since the killing of the president of Haiti and our year to power. You got gang and all that. You don't know how many people died in Haiti. But we didn't do anything up to the day to change that. People are dying in Haiti.
I agree. No.
More people died in Haiti in the last 6 months than in Ukraine, in the war in Ukraine. And you didn't do anything. But the president at the time, to return Aristide in power, brought 20,000 troops, American soldiers in Haiti. I was one of them. I served this country, the United States, for 23 years in the U.S. Army. But Haiti in my book.
Well, I appreciate your comment, and I totally agree. If I didn't say it clearly enough, which I hope I did. Maybe I did. The United States has been very, very hypocritical, extremely hypocritical in its relationship with Haiti, and not just Haiti. You could just fill in many other hemispheric neighbors: Mexico, Cuba, etc. Yes, I completely agree.
Question about that image.
Yeah.
It's not. Are those sculptures?
This is actually not the same. This is in Cap Haitien. This commemorates the final Haitian victory.
Are they statues?
They are statues. So this is the Battle of Vétier, which is like basically in what's now Cap Haitien in the north. This was the final defeat when the French militarily, effectively at the end of 1803, lost the war. And then peace negotiations basically for their withdrawal began.
Did you
Yeah.
climb up there?
Yeah. Yeah.
In July?
Yep.
What was the temperature in July?
It's hot. The temperature was hot.
Hot? Like 100 degrees, 110?
It's like 90s at least. It was mosquitoes. I was wearing pants too, because I left the archives in the Dominican Republic.
Right.
I was in the Dominican Republic the day before this.
Day before? Yeah.
In the archives, and I got my laptop in a backpack, and with my friend, that's his cousin, Idris. We just
you in the middle, right?
yes, and we jumped in a bus.
Right.
We drove the whole night, and then we just kept going. And we took taxis and taps and motorcycles, and then we ended up walking up, and there's so yeah. I wasn't well prepared. That's what you're asking.
You still have your suntan. You still have your suntan.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. Everybody should go. And so these are all. So after Henri Christophe led the building of this, which is an incredible place to visit, a lot of the cannons that you actually see sitting around. I don't know if there are already pictures of cannons in here. Maybe not. Yeah, here's one. So you just in the woods. I'm going too far here. Sorry, everybody. The cannonballs and the cannons themselves, these are from Napoleon. So if you go and look at the cannons, they have the French emblem from the Napoleonic era on them. And some of them are Spanish as well, because they use them to basically, after they defeated these different armies, to stockpile the fort. Yes?
So is what's the international military collaboration?
Yeah, you could. Some people speculate that. I think there's also been a really checkered past of international military involvement in Haiti. So how would that end? I don't know. Haitians have a lot of good reasons to be suspicious of these kinds of intervening neocolonial influences. So how would it end? I mean, you start something with hopefully good intentions, and then how does it play out? Who knows? I mean, they sent the Nepalese in, and they gave them cholera. So, yes. Yeah.
Most of our work is in Haiti right now. And first of all, I just want to commend you for really emphasizing the beautiful nature of the Haitian people and their culture.
Yeah.
Haiti is not what we see on CNN.
No, it's not.
And to that point, that I think there's other things that the U.S. can do besides just simply go in and take over. It's been very frustrating to us. We talk all the time with our cohort and our colleagues in the world of aid and water and such, pleading for a humanitarian corridor for aid, just to be able to get aid in through customs and out to people. To your question about where do people go right now, they are out in the countryside in refugee camps and among family and such, and it's creating this terrible pressure throughout the country. And it's very frustrating to look at U.S. will to move in other parts of the world where I'm all for that. But I'll always remember all the very good concern for 12 babies being rescued from NICUs in Gaza. I was all for that. There's no babies in NICUs in Haiti.
Yep.
We don't have NICUs.
Yep.
Okay? And again, as you said, it's 2 hours south of my area. And we don't care enough.
Yep.
We don't care enough. And I think that same disdain and distrust and reaction against people who liberated themselves is still alive.
Absolutely. And I think you're totally correct. And by revalorizing, right? So if you reconceptualize and revalorize Haiti, Haitian people, Haitian culture. You reinterpret, you reconsider Vodou, right, and the Vaudouisan, which aren't even the majority of the population. It's like definitely the majority of the population is Catholic, at least by how they identify, right? Then you have a totally different template. You should feel indebted to Haiti for what they stood up for and did in the face of the powers of the world, right? If you think about it that way, it's like, well, we should roll out the red carpet, you know? Yes.
First of all, I want to say thank you. I feel I'm one nation. I believe in the somebody told me that somebody said to do this.
You speak louder.
I was wrong with that, sorry. Somebody said this was like needed for somebody to learn about Haiti. I'm one of those persons that will never talk in public, so that was never my first, but I thank you for actually doing this book, for Haitian in general, and me as a Haitian, I say thank you.
My honor.
I'm gonna go way back and say, there's a lot that's going on in my head, I'm trying to grab all of them, but one of them is, you said that our state is not like in political power.
Mm-hmm.
He's not in political power, but he's in political service.
He's influencing. Yeah.
And the other one is Sweet Mickey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't call him Sweet Mickey, I just call him the boss of the union. And then the other one is, it's not that Haiti hates America, it's just that when you've been suppressed by somebody for so long, as for example, when we did get all independence, the only reason why the French had the nerve to come back and demand us to pay is because America did not acknowledge us as free black country. As if America had said Haiti is free, and I acknowledge that, other white power countries would say, yes, I acknowledge that too.
Yeah.
They would not have come back and get money.
Yeah.
And another thing is, how do the people in Port-au-Prince evacuated? So the beginning was they would just start going to like the rural areas, which is where I live. I like the island in the mountains.
Where?
I live like close to Haiti.
Okay.
It's like if you take the bike, it'll take you to depending on what time of day you go. I suggest you don't take it during the afternoon because you hate it. It'll be like 3 hours.
What's the name of the city?
It's called Solino.
Oh, okay.
Right by Port-au-Prince.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's as people are like coming away from Port-au-Prince, coming to like the other part of Haiti, they can't really get into those other parts.
Yeah.
Every other part has like a game affiliation that they do that block off the road. It's either you pay or you get killed. And if you are on a bus that's coming from Port-au-Prince to some other part, they won't mind stopping the bus and asking for what you do. If you complain about it, they'll just kill you. It's that simple. And as that was going on from the areas that I live, the mountain was very peaceful. But as stories about gangs erupted in Port-au-Prince started getting around, the mountain came out with that's what they had to do. Because other members of other gangs started going up the mountain and killing innocent. And one of the coolest ones was, one of them went to a house. There was a kid and a mother. They chopped the kid's head, they put it in a pot, they opened the fire, and then they took the mother with it. And when the father came to just saw it, there's nothing he could do. He just stood there and just watched it. So I say all this to say this is America's trying to say that they're trying to take their hands off of it, but it's like you're done beating up a child and then you're saying, no, okay, good, now you can get up and go take a shower. How is that going to happen if you don't get that shower? And I just said, my Haiti, my Haitian is a country that I would die for point blank. I don't know what anybody says. I would die for it point blank. And anytime somebody said that the Haitian is dead, I looked at you point blank and I said, you gotta shut up or I'm gonna make you. Because I know what my country is and I don't know what it isn't. Yes, it's going through whatever it's going, but I know the country that I was with. And one of my favorite athletes said something at one time, which always, whenever I hear anything bad about Haiti, I go back to it, which is, in order for it to rebuild, you gotta go through some nasty stuff. And that's all that's giving me hope. That's like, one day, eventually it will happen. But in order for that to happen, it's kind of like other countries that admit that I did this wrong. I'm not saying you gotta say you're sorry, because sorry don't really fix them. But just say, I messed up. What do you need for me to help you? It's that simple. Because the moment you say you're gonna send Kenyans to help Haiti rebuild, yes, they're black, but they're not Haitian. And if you're really trying to get Haitians to build Haiti, get Haitians to build it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know it's after 8. I mean, thank you all so much for the conversation. If you want to talk more, thank you all very much.